Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to take another look at HTML lists, and specifically, we're going to take a look at what is referred to as a description list. This video is part of a larger series of videos that focuses on an introduction to HTML and basic style. This video focuses on a description list. You might want to consider looking at a couple of my previous videos on the unordered and ordered list for comparison. In this particular video, we're going to take a look at a couple of examples, walking us through what is a description list and how you would use it. And so we'll start off by taking a look at the description list description. And it is basically to create a menu of sorts. And what I mean by that is if you think about it, going to a restaurant, you might have the item that you're wanting to order, the particular meal, and then below that, immediately below that, is going to be a description of that particular item. So the idea here is that you would have an unordered list, if you would, that basically just has the element, the particular menu item that you wanted to order, and then below that, the ingredients for that particular item. And so what we'll do is we're going to start over here again with Visual Studio, much like our earlier videos. Whatever ID you use does not really matter. We'll start off with an empty HTML page. And for the title here, I'm just going to attempt to describe what we're going to be going through here. So this is going to be our lists. This is going to be our description list. And we're going to do the same thing with our H1 tag, again, just to help us sort of structure what we're doing. And we're going to be just going through a couple of examples here. So we're going to start off with our example number one, and that is just to look at the mechanics of a description list. And so the description list starts off with the DL tag. That is going to be the outer tag. And you'll notice that inside of it are only two options. We have a DT tag, which is for the term or the name, if you would, for the menu item, and then the DD tag, which is going to be the description of that particular element. So we'll start off with our DT tag. This is going to be term number one. Again, I'm going to keep this one pretty generic, and we're going to follow this up with our DD tag, which is going to be description number one. This is the description of term number one. And you can see here that we can just simply copy and paste this a couple of times just so we can get a couple of examples in here so we can see the behavior of these tags before we jump into a more meaningful example. I'm just going to do three of them here. So this is going to be term one, term two, term three, followed by their descriptions. And then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and split the view here so that you can see. And again, right below that is basically going to be the description. What you're really getting for this is some more unique tabbing, if you would, some more unique aesthetics. And again, remember that we're not really focusing too much on the aesthetics. We're looking more at the structure. So again, this is sort of a convenient structure, if you would, that has some basic style mixed in, kind of like what we saw with our earlier examples. So let's go ahead and save this one. And this is going to be our lists description. .html. Notice again, I'm using the underscore to replace the space, just to keep it simple. And again, looking at it in our web browser, everything seems to be fine. And so what we want to do now is we want to come over here and see if we can do a different example, slightly modified example of this. And so what I want to do is I want to see what happens if I try to mess with the individual DT and DD elements. So what we'll do here is we'll start off. This is going to be our example number two. And what we want to do now is we're just going to change this a little bit. So what I want to do is see what happens if I try to add two DDs for a particular term. And so we have our DD 3A and 3B, and you'll notice that it works perfectly fine. In other words, you'll see that you can technically have two descriptions below an individual term. It sort of, again, acts like a P tag, if you would, mixed in with a unsorted or sorted list. Again, just gives you a little more variety. And then what we'd like to do is we'd like to take a look again under the DL tag. You'll notice that I only have a DD and a DT tag option. However, though, if I dig into either the DT or the DD tag, so in other words, we're going to come down here, look into the DT tag, you'll see that I again have a ton of options for my DT tag. In other words, nested inside of a DT tag, I can have pretty much most of our commonly used tags, and there are some excluded. Of course, you can only have a single body tag and so on, but pretty much most of the rest of them are available to us. For instance, you can insert a text area and things like that inside of a DT. Now, what you also can do is you can also add or modify the DD tag. You'll notice that within a DD tag, you can also have quite a few options. And you'll notice that you actually have a couple of extra options that you didn't have in the DT. So for instance, you'll see there is now a table tag, but there are other options to be put inside of a DD. You again just have a lot of options when looking at the DT and the DD tag in conjunction with the DL tag. Now, to demonstrate this and to come up with something that's perhaps useful to you, what I'd like to do is I'd like to sort of reflect a little bit on what we've covered in some of our earlier videos, and that I'd like to actually use the DL tag in conjunction with the DT and the DD tags to create sort of some documentation for how you would go about using the various lists. And so to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back to the W3 Schools site, and I'm going to go to the W3 Schools HTML list, and we're going to borrow the links for the unordered list and the ordered list, as well as the other lists. And you could see here that what we have here is going to be the DL, DT, and DD tags. So the idea is I'm going to build sort of an aggregated help, if you would, in this third example. And so what we'll do here is we'll follow through now. We have our H2 tag for our example 3. This is going to be our lists help. Maybe a summary might be a better way of putting it. And what I want to do then is I want to use a DL tag to list then each of the 3 options that we've explored in this video and in our earlier videos. And so to do that, I'm just going to have our DT tag for our unordered list. I'm going to do the same thing for our ordered list. And then lastly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have our description list. Now, what I am going to do a little bit different is I'm actually going to turn these now into hyperlinks. Instead of just simply having them as straight text, we're going to go ahead and do a tag and an href attribute. I'll close this for right now. I'll come back and populate that with the correct hyperlink in just a second. But again, I'll just simply want to go ahead and get this structured. So there's going to be our unordered list. For our ordered list, again, another href. For right now, I'll leave that blank. And then lastly, for our description list, we're going to have empty tag for right now, description list. Now, let's first go ahead and populate these. You can go ahead and pause the video and do this yourself, or you can follow along with me. Basically, what I'm doing is I'm just going to go through. I'm going to grab the link for the ordered list, bounce back over here to Visual Studio, drop this into the href attribute. Do the same thing with the unordered list. I guess I kind of did those out of order, but that's no big deal. And then lastly, what we'll do is we'll come over here and we'll grab the other lists link, and we'll put this here. Now, you're probably wondering what I'm planning on doing now with the DD tag or the description. What I thought might be interesting is that we go ahead and include in the DD tag all of the individual elements that you would find in these respective tags. So in other words, in the unordered list, if you've already watched that video, you'll know that you're going to use your UL tag and your LI tag. And so what I thought we could do for a little bit of variety here is we'll go ahead and include another A, href, and I'm going to go ahead and leave this one blank. And I'm going to populate this as we go along, but this is going to be their UL tag. We can technically exception some of this out, as you saw in our earlier video. And I'm going to go ahead and put in a line break here just so that we've got a little cleaner looking. And then we do the same thing now with our LI. And this is very similar, of course, as you already know, for our ordered lists. The big difference, of course, is instead of UL, it's OL. And then lastly, what we want to do is we want to do the same thing now for the description list. And of course, there's 3 tags that we're interested in. There's going to be the DL tag, the DD, and DT tags. So we'll start off with the DT, and then lastly, the DD. Now, all this is going to be a matter of now is a little bit of bookkeeping. In other words, what we'll do is we'll go back through and we'll grab then the individual pages for each of these. And again, we'll start off with the DL. You can see here that this is the documentation, including any attributes that might be relevant to the DL. This is going to be a little bit time consuming here. So probably what I'm going to do is, just to speed this up a little bit, is I'm just going to go ahead and grab the OL and the LI and the UL and the LI pages. So we'll start off with our OL, and we'll go up here, we'll go ahead and populate the OL tag. And then we go back here, and you can again just scroll down here and you'll be able to find the UL tag. Again, this is just meant to create sort of a summary of what we've already covered in this video and in the previous video. So there is our UL tag. And then lastly, the one that we're interested in is going to be the LI, which is the list item. Again, you can quickly find this by simply scrolling through their menu. And so there we go. There's our list item. The idea is, how would you create some practical documentation for yourself? And so we'll go ahead and save that. We'll stop with this one, but you'll see here that now what I've got is sort of this menu, if you would, that has a nice summary of all of the hyperlinks that we have been working with. You can go ahead, for instance, if you wanted to, you could space this out a little bit more with the, before doing the BR tag, you could insert, for instance, a P tag if you wanted to. You could insert some text inside of the description. So for instance, if we did want to clean this up a little bit, or maybe make this look a little bit more user-friendly, a little more descriptive, then what we can do is we can go back to the unordered list and maybe grab a brief explanation of what the unordered list is. And in this case here, we'll just go ahead and have an unordered HTML list. That's probably a good enough of a description here. And so what we'll do is we'll come back here outside of the A tag, and then we'll just specify that this is an unordered HTML list. For the OL, this is going to be an ordered HTML list. And then so on. We can go back and we can grab for the list item itself the description of the tag. And so this is going to be just, we'll just go ahead and make it up here. This description is not all that interesting. So what we'll do is we'll call this one then an individual list item. And we'll just carry this over again to the description for the ordered list as well. And there we go. I think that's probably about as much in the way of changes that we want to make. I think you've probably got a pretty good idea of how this is going to work. And you can do this again, the same thing for the DL, the DT, the DD. Basically, the point behind this is that you can create hyperlinks, you can use images, a whole bunch of options that you can do inside of your DL, DT, and DD tags, specifically inside of the DT and the DD tags. And you can see here that each of my hyperlinks are working correctly. So hopefully you found this video useful. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And thank you for watching.